Good morning, everyone. Hope y'all are having a good start to your trading week so far. So we're going to talk a little bit about how I use Bookmap to trade futures and stocks intraday, looking for setups driven by order flow and liquidity. And then I also like to look at other areas like volume profile and options, zooming out a bit. So let's talk a little bit about all that this morning and a bit more. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But first, let's just really quick get through some of these slides, including the general disclosure, which reads all Bookmap Limited materials, information, and presentations are for educational purposes only and should not be considered specific investment advice nor recommendations. And a quick little ditty about me. My trading journey began in 2005. I funded my own account and began trading stocks, then moved on to options, futures, commodities, and Forex as I expanded my horizons. In 2006, I was fortunate enough to have enough trading profits and savings to start rolling that into long-term investments. And by the way, folks, if you've just started trading or you've been trading for a while, I still strongly recommend considering that. Rolling those profits into longer-term investments. Keep trading in the short time frame, but don't keep those profits in the trading account. Invest them. Generate either wealth building, some sort of fixed income stream, or otherwise. That being said, I navigated through the great financial crisis, which helped me to gain a better sense of importance of the big picture and how that can impact markets. Obviously, there was a lot of moving parts. I came into this as a technically driven trader. So I didn't really understand the macro. I didn't understand a lot of the other elements that were moving markets at that point. And I had to kind of get a quick study on all that, sort of trial by fire, waking up some days with, the Dow limit down or stocks that were essentially bidless. And then you'd get these stick saves from monetary and fiscal authorities, emergency 50 bips cuts, so on and so forth. So it really had me gain appreciation for the role that policy and macro and fiscal elements can play in markets, because they were game changers often, especially as we got into early 2009. As a result, I gained a better appreciation of understanding intermarket dynamics, momentum, and macro. And as luck would have it, and I would purely describe this as luck, I got out of the way of the great financial crisis by identifying what looked like a giant potential double top. And I said to myself, look, unless we can break above those highs that we saw in 1999, 2000, I'm not so convinced that we can get there here, because I'm starting to see some signs of exhaustion. So I took profits, but it was only on a technical basis. It wasn't that I saw the great financial crisis coming. Sure, I saw people getting loans with no documentation, and that percolated some sense of concern, but I didn't know quite how big or bad it could get, right? So I got out of the way, and I became an observer of all this, trading it here and there, having some great trades and some tragic trades during the great financial crisis, but also really learning a lot of the lessons the market was teaching. As a result, my approach evolved from being purely technical to much more systematic. I started off as a discretionary trader. I became a much more systematic trader as well. So my systematic approach is driven by momentum, price action, options flow, sentiment, positioning, volume profile, and the big picture. I backtest and build my own models and systems to trade a variety of different asset classes. And that's one of the things that, quite frankly, helps me to stay a little bit more, I would say, in tune. And that is that I really do focus on that systematic approach to sort of keep me a bit more honest, less emotional, less driven by greed or fear, and much more driven by my systems and my signals. And I began working with Bookmap in early 2022 because I saw great value in the way their platform displays market data. And I will say that the stops and icebergs in particular, and some of the other indicators that I'm able to layer on top of that, have been very helpful to track what's going on intraday. And I co-founded TraderAid in 2022 and MacroVisor in 2023 to share my experience, ideas on market opportunities, and education. I also build a number of unique tools, and these are largely driven around options and how they influence markets and otherwise. So that's something that I think is pretty helpful with Bookmap. It makes it very easy to layer on your own data. So, you may find value in what the platform offers out of the box or maybe some of the tools in the marketplace, but you can also layer in your own data into Bookmap pretty easily, which is pretty cool using things like Cloud Notes. Now, if you're interested in checking out Bookmap, they do have a pretty sweet deal going on right now. And that is that you can get up to 40% off of Bookmap plans with an exclusive promotion that we're running with Bookmap. Visit traderaid.com/bookmap. That's the URL you see on screen, traderaid.com/bookmap. It'll redirect you to their website. Scroll down and you'll see those discounted plans. And right now, Bookmap is running a competition. You can win $1,000 and a year of Global Plus. And as a part of this futures trading competition, you actually get futures data as a part of the competition as well in your Bookmap directly. So if you're able to win this competition, that's awesome. You get a decent little check, but you also get access to Bookmap and some of these features during the competition. And coming right up, we've got an institutional trader series. So today, Spencer Regal, hedge fund manager, starting just after this session wraps up at 10 a.m. And throughout the week, we have other institutional traders adding value by demonstrating how they look at Orderflow and Bookmap. And be sure to join the Bookmap Discord. They've got a lot of cool stuff going on there, including events, education, and a great supportive community. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into Bookmap here. I've got crude oil on screen, so we'll start there. It has been quite a volatile trader up this morning. And looking at crude up about 1% this morning over the day, really reversing some of those losses over the last week. And we'll zoom out a little bit. You can see that push higher over the European session, dragging the point of control higher, bringing us up to 70.66 right now as we're trading just around the point of control. And overall, I'm more bullish of energy stocks than crude oil itself at the moment. Just looking at the resilience of things like XLE versus oil, I'm thinking that there is some relative strength there. So I would rather, if I want to be bullish of energy, express that view in XLE instead of crude. But I'm watching crude very closely because it's a great heuristic for what we're seeing in terms of geopolitical tensions and also the global economy. It's sort of the heartbeat of the global economy because obviously the vast majority of products and services that we engage in have some direct or indirect relationship with crude oil. Now let's go into the S&P 500 futures. They are down this morning, and we are seeing some of that pressure increased modestly over the last half hour here. S&P implied to open down just over 0.5% to 5821.90. NASDAQ under a little more pressure here. Cash implied to open down to 20,207.20, down 0.75%. And the Dow implied to open 42,754, down 0.4% here. And if we zoom out, we can see there has been some selling pressure from that European session, intensifying a little bit more as we get closer to the US session. And this is not a liquid order book. Once again, as you can see, the offers above 18,000, the bids below 19,000. Adding them together, that's 37,000. That is not a liquid order book for the S&P 500. So that is something to take into consideration for your trading. If you are going to approach this market today and you're looking to take some day trades, be aware that a less liquid order book can promote intraday volatility. So it behooves one to consider smaller position size and wider stops in order to accommodate for a less liquid trading environment. And you may have seen the chart in the past, but if you haven't, nevertheless, I'll recap. Liquidity and volatility are inversely correlated. So low liquidity tends to portend to higher volatility and vice versa. Something to keep in mind as we get into the trading day today. And we're just going to zoom back into that 20-minute time frame. Then we have the NASDAQ here on screen. And the NASDAQ has a similar situation. It has seen a pull overnight, especially really quite recently. And I think that's something to keep in mind here, just that we have this sort of pressure in tech. Tech is hurting a little bit more than the broader market. This is one of the reasons I do think it makes sense to have some positioning in ETFs like RSP, which are the equal weighted S&P for the longer term portfolio, because it does look like tech could underperform for a little bit here as there's this rotational flow happening. So just something to take into consideration. But for the purposes of today, we are watching the NASDAQ. It tends to be important for momentum. And the way it's been behaving of late, especially looking at the last several trading days, gives me a sense that we could start to see another pullback in its early stages. Let's take a look at the Russell. But before we do, I'm just going to zoom back into that 20-minute time frame. Russell looking a little bit more resilient today. Yesterday, it was getting hammered pretty well. It's down over 1%. Today, the Russell's implied to open down about 0.5%. It's actually starting to ramp up a little bit as you see the other indices coming down a bit. And I think that does have to do a little bit with the Russell being the preferred hedging instrument of so many institutions. So if they're getting out of some of their longs and they're flattening their book in the NASDAQ, they're also covering some of their shorts in the Russell. So that may explain some of what we're seeing this morning. 10-year note futures getting a bit of a bid, which is interesting given that, you know, for so long, they had been unloved. We've seen rates come up above 4% on the 10-year. So seeing that bid this morning is giving you a little bit of a sense that there is some relief potentially in rates that could come about today if that should continue. And if we look at the Treasury auction schedule here, just trying to pull that up on my screen. Their website is thinking about it. So I'll give it some time to think about it. We'll move on here to gold. And gold's been making record highs pretty regularly. It actually is sort of consolidating in a range this morning. I look at gold as a interim term opportunity. I still think that gold can get to $3,000 an ounce by the first half of 2025. So I'm still pretty constructive on gold. And just looking at the auction schedule here on the Treasury website, nothing really for today. It's really a lot more about tomorrow and Thursday. And it's not even a very busy schedule. We've got a 20-year auction this afternoon, results after 1 p.m. So that would be something to watch especially if you're involved with duration. That will impact the 10-year as well, potentially. And it could impact gold, the other long duration asset. But gold here overall looking pretty constructive, just sort of consolidating here. But you know what I'm more excited about, as you may have seen on my Twitter feed, is silver. Silver really does have a broadly constructive look. It is well bid once again this morning. And so looking at gold, gold is up about 0.4% this morning. Silver is up almost 2%. It's up 0.4% over the last hour. So I would say silver is breaking out. It's up to highs we haven't seen in over 12 years recently. And I believe that we do have room higher in this rally. I'm looking for silver to hit $48 an ounce next year, probably in the first half, retesting those 2011 highs before it broke down. And the interesting thing about gold and silver is they haven't really gone parabolic yet. So there is still room in this near-term, more constructive momentum to build some positioning into these as a longer-term setup. Intraday, I think silver and gold could also make for interesting trades. I will be watching the 20-minute opening range on these today, especially silver, as I still believe it has more room to run. And Bitcoin trading just below 67,000 this morning. Just consolidating, a bit of a downdraft overnight, but overall just sort of consolidating here. It does look primed to make a continued push higher. And I think some of that also has to do with a more constructive macro backdrop. You've got central banks around the world cutting relatively aggressively. You've got China talking stimulus, and you have more and more uncertainty about geopolitical outcomes, but also about what may happen in this election. Trump seems to be the market's preferred winner. If that's the case, that also seems like a net positive for crypto. Maybe some of that is being priced in, but nevertheless, there are some tailwinds here in crypto to consider. And we've got just about 13 minutes until the market open here. And folks, if you have any questions as the presentation is going, please feel free to ask. Going to go back to the S&P futures, just seeing a little bit of a bounce off those pre-market lows to the point of control. And if we zoom out a little bit and look at a longer term chart, I am potentially looking for this to pull back to about 58.21 before we could resume any kind of upward price discovery. It would just make sense. We have this sort of pattern of we get a nice push up, we sort of start to roll over, then we consolidate, and then we prepare for that next push up. So I'd be kind of looking for, the market to take a little bit of a breather and then try to make that next push up. I think that's a reasonably likely scenario, especially given all the events ahead of us. So 58.21 is a level we'll be watching on the S&P 500. I've been asked, where do I see Bitcoin going in 2025? I'll be the first to admit I am not as adamant of a follower of Bitcoin as I am some of the other areas I've talked about, like stocks, oil, gold, silver, rates, etc. But I think if Bitcoin can take out its 2024 and really all-time highs, then we are reasonably likely to see a six-digit figure on Bitcoin. So I wouldn't be too surprised to see a $100,000 Bitcoin in 2025, provided we can make a determined push above that 71,000 level. Because you do have a backdrop that's largely accommodative for long duration risk, right? You've got rates that have come down. The cost of capital has come down globally and continues to come down as you see more stimulus coming into global markets. And so I always look at crypto and especially Bitcoin as a relief valve for excess liquidity. As that global excess liquidity increases, crypto should have a reasonably strong bid. So that would be my thought process, but obviously there are moving parts that can change that as we go throughout time. I'm more constructive overall on silver as the opportunity here, because I feel like the key component to silver that is often underappreciated by investors is that 50% of demand for physical silver is industrial. Investing demand is like 15 to 20%, right? So silver's really an industrial story, and we're starting to see signs that industrial demand is picking up. And that's one reason I think silver could still run reasonably strongly from here into next year. So getting some thoughts from the IMF on the global economy this morning, downgrading Eurozone forecast, seeing 2025 GDP growth at just 1.2% and a potential 0.5% hit to global GDP from trade tensions. Looking around global futures this morning, we've got a decent bid in energy, not just West Texas Intermediate, but also Brent, gasoline, and heating oil. Natural gas, the odd one out, down just about 0.8% this morning. Gold up just about 0.5%, silver up 1.5%, platinum 1%, copper 0.8%, and palladium almost 2%. The dollar also firm here, trading 103.84 ahead of the open in U.S. session. Let's take a look at some of the majors here ahead of the market open. First, we have Apple on screen. And Apple's down just about 1% pre-market to 233.90. Just consolidating here, but from that overnight open, just mirroring what we saw in the NASDAQ and the S&P, a bit of a draw. Amazon, a similar look, not quite as dire as Apple, down about 0.4% this morning ahead of the open. And Alibaba, this is a stock that had a lot of excitement. Some of that seems to have faded recently as it's well off its highs and trading just down about 0.9% ahead of the market open. But I do think it'll be worth watching some of these Chinese stocks in reaction to any potential government stimulus, especially if it comes in a reasonable size. Alphabet or Google shares down just about 0.5% pre-market here. And FXI, the China large cap ETF, up just about 0.16% pre-market. JD.com down about 0.25% pre-market here. Meta down 0.4% pre-market. Microsoft actually bid up 0.25% here. Actually, a little more than that now. Now bid up just about 0.33%, trading an even 420. Netflix down 0.5%, but an impressive run after their earnings. One bit of interesting news this morning about Netflix is they've decided to shut down their AAA gaming studio in Southern California, which was the hope that it could be an engine of renewed growth for the company, but it doesn't seem like they're reaching success there, which is interesting because in their earnings call last week, they actually spoke rather optimistically about the prospects of that same studio. NVIDIA stock down just about 0.3% pre-market here. And Pinduoduo, this is one that I'm actually quite bullish on right now. Oh, look at that, up 2.75% this morning to 128.34. Love to see it. Full disclosure, I'm long a call or several calls for 140 November 8th on this stock. So I saw some very interesting flow. I like the chart pattern, could be an inverted head and shoulders bottom. I think that this is one of the companies that would benefit from Chinese stimulus if it starts to come in size as the domestic economy could build. So Pinduoduo, looking at that one as a potential swing really over the next 2 weeks here. I already have some exposure to it, may build into it. Tesla this morning down about 0.6%. So we've looped around the stocks. We're going to go back to the futures here. We've got about 5 minutes left before the market opens. As you can see on screen, this is what we call the heat map, right? You can see liquidity where it has been. This is the market making algorithm on the S&P, and then where it is at present. What becomes more interesting is if you see larger areas of offers and bids that are outside of that market making algorithm. But also what's interesting is really getting a sense as to how larger desks are trading this. So I really do like to watch the icebergs. Sometimes when you see large amounts of passive buying, say 1,000 icebergs here, 1,000 icebergs there, that can be a decent turning point if the market is moving down. So for example, today, with a market that's under some pressure, let's say we see a sell down and then it starts to cap out and we see a fair amount of passive nibbling as it's going down and as it's basing, that can be the early signs of a potential turnaround. The other bit of data that I like to look at in addition to that is what is options flow in the SPX doing, converted to ES levels. So that's a tool I built called the SPX Options Visualizer. That shows us the flow after the market opens and it aggregates it from CBOE. So if I can see that icebergs are kind of absorbing that negative flow and we have institutional call interest building at higher strikes, that can tell me we may be in the early stages of a turnaround, right? So those are some of the things I like to look at on screen. I also like to look at stops because stop runs, especially if they're large enough, can be somewhat exhaustive and that can mark a turning point. And what's always really interesting is if you get a sell side stop run and at the same time you've got icebergs buying the same contracts that are being puked up by those stops, that's telling you that the more momentum sensitive traders are getting booted out and the larger trading desks are passively accumulating that same exposure. That can also be an even higher confidence indication of a potential turnaround. Add the options flow to that, and it can give you a greater sense as to where price may be going intraday, even be able to put some finite targets on that. Now, one thing that I like to watch during the first 20 minutes of trading is the opening range. So I do have the high price level and the low price level reset at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. So that way we can tell after we get past 9:50 a.m. if we have a build above or below and some acceptance made that around that range, right? So for example, this morning with downward pressure, let's say we get a push below the bottom of the range, we build some acceptance down there and we start to form a downward trending day. That can give me some confidence that I may want to fade the move and continue to layer on some shorts unless and until we see, say, an exhaustive stop run and or some aggressive iceberg absorption. I also really do like to watch the options flow. I think it's pivotal for how this market trades. And there's a good reason for that. The S&P 500 index options complex trades 1.2 trillion of notional every day, with about half of that expiring the same day. US equity futures trade about 450 to half billion of notional every day. So options really are the preferred instrument, and the futures are really a reflection of what's happening in the options market more often than not, which is one of the reasons I think it is so incredibly important to be familiar with and to be able to watch the options flow as a part of your intraday strategy. And that is why I built the SPX Options Visualizer. It is something you can learn more about. If you want to learn more about it, go to TraderAid.com/SPX. In order to have the visualizer right now, you do need to have a copy of Bookmap with rhythmic data, Bookmap data, or DX feed data. So pretty well consolidating here just above the point of control. We're just 1 minute or less away from the market open here. And this morning, really not a lot of events other than a litany of central bank speakers from the ECB and one Fed speaker, Harker, at 10 a.m. And U.S. markets are opening here. You can see some of that increased volatility. We'll zoom in just a little bit for the opening. Seeing a bit of pressure after that initial pop. Continuing to cut to new lows post-open. We're just going to zoom out a bit now. And we see that pressure building here. We are post-OPEX, so we don't have those passive flows first and last hour from decaying SPX puts bidding the market up as market makers reduce their hedges or their shorts. We also don't have buyback flows. Those are essentially on pause as we get into peak earnings reporting. So two of those important factors that sort of help to buffer the market's downside or even bid it up in the absence of selling are not present today, which opens us up for, well, an opening as we're seeing. S&P 500 cash down 0.5%, NASDAQ down 0.6%, Russell down 0.25%, Dow down 0.33% this morning, with VIX bid up 1.27% to spot 18.59. Let's take a look around some of the other indices. Got the NASDAQ showing a somewhat similar look here, just a pop and drop right off the open here. Looks like it's headed towards new lows potentially. You do have a decent aggressive sell delta down here as well. Some chunky selling as we explored that lower level earlier. So you can see that 499 sell delta. That would just give you a sense that if we do move meaningfully below there, and we assume that at least some of that selling was sell to open shorts, that the higher we move away from that, the more those shorts would be out of the money or essentially become more motivated buyers. So it's something that's important to watch when you see those larger sell deltas come in on the volume profile. We do see a bit of a bid back on the NASDAQ off its lows, now pushing above the point of control here and testing VWAP from below. Let's take a look at the Russell here. Russell is also having a bit of a struggle, has that pop and drop, but it's having a little more trouble getting off the mat versus what we're seeing in the NASDAQ here. Let's look at 10-year note futures, continuing to see a bid there. We're going to just zoom in a bit more. But it is something to watch. In the most recent trading, a little bit of a slide after consolidating, but we've had that bid up off the lows going into this morning. Crude oil continuing to see a strong bid here, now trading 70.88, and we're seeing some interest build to the upside here with these offers that can act a bit magnetic. When trend is your friend and you see these offers start to build, they basically act as liquidity magnets. So oil off to a strong start here. Gold also getting a decent little pop here, and then starting to fall a bit, and then getting a pop again. You could see that in the 20-minute chart a bit here. You see that drop, pop, drop, pop. Kind of interesting. Not super liquid trading in gold. The contract's got about 10,000 order book depth. Let's take a look at silver, and we will also zoom this one into a 20-minute time frame. So we are seeing silver push to new cash session highs here, as it is quickly approaching $35 an ounce. You'll recall I posted a thread on Twitter. If you haven't checked it out, it's in my pinned, about how I thought silver's about to make a pretty big move. I still think we're in the early stages of that. Bitcoin trading down a little bit here so far, selling off the open, now trading 66,890. And Apple having a bit of a sell off the open here. Tim Cook said that we don't have to be first to AI. We want to be best in AI. And of course, when they say AI, they mean Apple Intelligence, which so far seems to be pretty underwhelming on a lot of the experiences that have been reported. Amazon also dropping a bit off the open recently, making new cash session lows and popping off those lows just around that 187 area of offered liquidity. And Alibaba having a pretty strong pop and giving that back to some degree here. Just going to zoom in a little bit. You can see that pop and that drop in Baba shares. Alphabet pushing to new session highs here. Consolidating after that push, but overall, we're starting to see some interest building in that 165 level and then above that 165.40. FXI mirroring Baba got a bit of a pop and a drop now, testing VWAP. JD.com similar to Baba, although much less pronounced, pop and a drop. Meta largely consolidating here, moving up to new session highs, but a pretty narrow range in the stock. Microsoft pushing to new session highs here. Decent amount of offered liquidity overhead at 425 with 36,000 shares on offer. And Netflix pop and drop, sort of like what we saw in Baba. It got up there, that 770 area of offered liquidity, about 953 shares. Nothing too big, but nevertheless, buyers didn't seem to have the demand to take it through there. So we're retreating for now. And NVIDIA trying to make new cash session highs here. We do see some more flows into Pinduoduo options. The 140 strike for November 1st. Those calls getting had to do a double take. 880,000 in premium paid for those Pinduoduo November 1st calls. So that is interesting. Just looking at that Pinduoduo trade, we did see a sort of pop and a drop, but we are still up this morning. Shares trading up 2.25% on Pinduoduo. Those flows likely to be constructive. We also see some positive flow coming into UPS 135 strikes, that 135 strike for January 17th of next year. Underlying trading 130.57 when that came through, about 250,000 premium paid. Tesla had a drop, now popping and settling back to the point of control here. Very large area of bid, around 215, 126,000 shares sitting on bid at that level. Moving back to the S&P, and we're just going to zoom out a little bit to the 20-minute time frame and zoom out the price structure a bit here as well. We can see we're largely consolidating after that initial drop. We did see some passive buyers come in, about 200 contracts of ES bought just at the point of control by an iceberg buyer. Nothing too exciting so far to start the day. Just about a 10-handle opening range so far in the first 9 minutes of trading. S&P now testing VWAP from below, just below this gamma flip level as well. Let's take a look at the NASDAQ here. NASDAQ looking stronger than the S&P, well above VWAP and the point of control, making new cash session highs here. Pulling back just a little bit after making that high. And we do see some liquidity building above in the NASDAQ as well. Those offers can potentially be a bit magnetic. And folks, if you're watching, if you have any questions, do let me know. Got about 20 minutes left on the stream here. And if you're enjoying the stream, feel free to share it out, whether you're watching it on YouTube or Twitter or elsewhere. Give it a like, share it with friends, let them know that next week we'll be back, 9 a.m. Eastern, to demonstrate how I like to use Bookmap to analyze order flow and potentially find trading opportunities here. Let's move on to the Russell. Russell's not having a great day. Made cash session lows just after the open. Now it looks like we're about to re-explore those lows. I know there's a lot of bullishness about the small caps, but I've got to be honest with you. I don't see it the same way. And that's not because I don't like small caps. Actually, there's sometimes amazing opportunities in some of the better small caps. It's more because the Russell itself is an index full of poor quality components. So if you really like small caps, might I suggest looking at the S&P 600, which is a small cap index built by Standard & Poor's, the same folks that built the S&P 500, higher quality components. So if you want to express that view, that's where I personally would want to do it. But my concern is just that this is an area of the market that is likely to continue struggling unless rates come down appreciably from here, because most of these companies pay on revolving lines of credit, and those are still quite expensive at current interest rates. So we'll be watching the Russell here, but with rates having moved up as much as they have over the last several weeks, that is one reason the Russell could remain under some degree of pressure. Speaking of rates, we got the 10-year on screen. We just saw a decent size sell iceberg on this, which did mark the high in the futures. It's just around 111.205. That 2,000 lot iceberg came through and sort of put a cap on that upward move. And crude oil this morning got up to just about 70.91 and is now pulling back just a little bit. But overall, we're hearing some more ruminations that maybe, just maybe, there will be a strike on Iran from Israel. That could be something that happens this week. What impact it may have on the region, on geopolitics, and on energy remains unclear, but we have heard initially that energy production facilities are not expected to be a target of that strike. So it may not have a major impact on oil. Gold continuing to just chop and consolidate here. Overall, though, the pattern in gold is still pretty healthy from a technical basis. We could pull back a bit. Wouldn't be too surprising if we did before we make that next move higher in this sort of stair-step pattern. But as someone who's been trading precious metals for quite a long time, the one thing that I'll tell you is constructive stair-step patterns tell you you're still early on in a bull market. The bull market's going to end when you get that parabolic move. Once you get that parabolic move, I know it's hard to know exactly where it ends, but often it's good to start taking some profits into that because it can reverse just as fast as it started. So for now, we're well before that. We haven't seen that kind of move in gold, silver, or the miners. So I still think we have some innings left in this game. Silver continuing to make cash session highs here, 34.81. Trading on the silver contract for December. I still think this thing has room to run. Bitcoin continuing to consolidate largely to the downside here as it tests its session lows. Now, we're going to quickly go over to Pinduoduo. We mentioned this one earlier. I told you about the flows that are coming through it. We can see it's recently pushed to session highs here, and I don't have the high-low markers on it, so I guess I need to add those on. So give me just a moment there so we can track that. There we go. So we did see that push to cash session highs. We retreated just a little bit, but overall, those flows that we just talked about earlier are helping to give this stock a bit of a push. So, there's your trade idea, more of a swing time frame, but Pinduoduo now trading up over 3% to 128.87, retesting those session highs. Let's go back and check some of the other major stocks this morning. Apple off its lows, retesting the VWAP, looking like it's about to retest the point of control. Amazon pushing above the point of control, starting to look much more constructive. Got a large area of offered liquidity above 22,000 shares at 189. Again, could act like a bit of a magnet. BABA consolidating here, certainly not giving us the same sort of move as Pinduoduo, but not looking terrible either, just sort of consolidating around $100. Alphabet shares making new cash session highs, taking out that 165 area of offered liquidity where there's about 22,000 shares on offer. We discussed this earlier as being a potential magnet. Well, we had that magnetic effect. Price was pulled into it, and that offer was released. FXI, like BABA, consolidating here just around $31, $32, trading currently $31.81. JD shares also moving a bit higher here. We're just going to zoom in to the time frame, testing those cash session highs, making a new minor high and then pulling back. And Meta actually starting to look quite a bit stronger here, making new cash session highs, pulling back a little bit here, but you can see we're starting to see some stronger offers. 579, about 7,000 shares on offer up there. Could be a bit of a magnet for this one. Believe it or not, I have some Boeing call flow coming through, targeting the 160 strike with 321,000 of premium for January 17th of 2025. Moving back to the screen, Microsoft shares trading 423, getting closer and closer to that magnet level we talked about earlier, and at a lower price, around 425, 36,147 shares on offer there. Worth watching that level. Netflix just sort of consolidating here, but finding support around that point of control, and now moving up above it, and VWAP starting to look more constructive, and we're starting to see a little bit more liquidity building above as well, which is generally constructive. NVIDIA making new cash session highs, pulling back to VWAP here, may test it, but overall this one also looks constructive. A chunky 1 million offer casually sitting at 145. And as we talked about Pinduoduo, it's continuing to move higher. Now 3.5% on PDD. And you're starting to see some of that liquidity also become a little bit thicker overhead. So that is something that I like to see. We got 138,333 shares on offer, 131, 10,000 shares on offer. If we go to that strike where there was a lot of option interest at 140, you can see there's not a lot of liquidity up from 131 to there. And then you get to that 11,000 shares on offer. I think this thing moves higher. Tesla consolidating after making a new cash session high, just trading around VWAP here. Going to loop right back to the S&P 500 futures, which are overall looking constructive. Just sort of a minor series of higher lows and higher highs here. And we have pushed that cash session high to a new high level. Now we have an opening range of about 11 handles. Nothing terribly inspiring, but we've got to respect what the market gives us here. And so what I'd be looking for, if this is going to be a day that turns into a green day, as it were, would be a push above that top of the opening range around 58.73 and building acceptance up there as well. We can also see there's a large resting offer just overhead. That's a little bit bigger than where the market making algorithm typically has size. Typically, the market making algorithm has lots of about 300, 400, sometimes 500. We can see 841 sitting up here in combined exposure. So that's another area to watch. Just if we're able to push through that liquidity and continue driving higher, that'll tell you buyers have decent demand. Order book remains light, 39,000 order book depth on ES. So it is a day to be cautious with size. as a lighter order book implies using wider stops to account for that potential increase in volatility from low liquidity. Let's see if we have some ideas to where flows are right now. We have a pretty decent distribution between puts and calls so far to start the day. We have the most active call strike up here just around 58.91. Most active put strike, and these are SPX levels converted to ES, just above 58.40. I'll get the exact levels from my Discord bot, Gur. So hot call, 58.92.25. Hot put, 58.42.25. And intraday put call ratio currently 0.96. And that most active put would imply SPX cash 5,800. That's where there's a decent amount of flow on the put side. On the call side, looking more like that would be around 58.50. SPX. Let's take a look at the NASDAQ here. NASDAQ made a nice, powerful pop to new session highs just up to that area of offered liquidity and now retreating. And looking like it may give that VWAP level another test. Russell just can't get off the mat. This has been a theme this morning as the rest of the market seems to be lifting higher off of its lows. The Russell is just sort of, well, it doesn't want to play. Small caps now leading the U.S. indices lower, down 0.6%. 10-year note futures also seeing a little bit of pressure here. This is putting some upward pressure on rates on the longer end. That could also be negatively impacting the Russell. Just a quick break on Pinduoduo. Shares are trading higher here. I can't get away from this because of the price action. 130.43 up 4.5%, and it keeps moving higher. Those flows were an early tell as to where this one could go, and it is continuing to push. We also have some flow coming in to TSM this morning, the 220 strike, underlying right now 199.55, about 214,000 in premium paid for those. But again, hard to get away from Pinduoduo, now up 4.5% in the early trading day. Am I going to get to that 140? Are my calls going to be in the money today? I mean, this is a pretty big move that's happening in this company. And this company specifically, we're not seeing it in a lot of the other Chinese shares. So PDD is one to watch here on the basis of flows and technicals that could imply a large inverted head and shoulders bottoming pattern. Just got about 5 minutes left on the stream here. Hey, James. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. I definitely understand that learning how to trade with Bookmap is a process. And I think that the beginning of the process really involves observation and trying to figure out how it fits into your system or how you may adapt your system to use it more. I recommend looking at some of the past streams I've created for Bookmap that demonstrate how I use it, as well as the other content creators on the platform. I think that can help with confidence levels. And as always, you're welcome to reach out if you have any questions. Big Deal Donuts, yeah, I do look at patterns like P or B patterns for sure. And folks, if you want a head start into Bookmap to really dive into how I use it, I also do one-on-one coaching. So that's something you can learn about more if you visit traderaid.com. You can get up to 20% off your first coaching session using the coupon COACHMAP at checkout. If you're interested in learning more about what we do at TraderAid, visit traderaid.com/Discord. We have a 3-day free trial, so it's no risk. You can join our Discord, check out what we're doing there. If it suits your trading style, that's great. We've got a lot of awesome tools, trading ideas, including this Pinduoduo idea. That's the sort of stuff I look at, this convergence of flow, technicals, macro, to set up some of these trades. We also have an awesome community, and we focus on education. It's not just ideas and tools. It's also helping you become a more self-sufficient trader. Because to me, that's what it's all about. And honestly, when I started back in 2005, I wish there was a community like that existed then that could have helped me jumpstart and prevent some of the trials by fire that the market tends to inflict on us as early traders. And we could see Pinduoduo taking out that offer at 131, now heading to 132, where we see an offer building there with 13,000 shares now. This thing just continues to rocket. Yeah, anytime. I'm always open to questions. I feel like one of the most important parts for us as traders, wherever we are in our journey, is being able to learn from others and being able to ask questions and having that sort of community atmosphere, which is what I'm all about. Why is Microsoft ripping? I will say I have not necessarily been paying as close attention to Microsoft this morning, but you do see there's that rather large area of offered shares just above at 430. So let me just pull up my news screener here and see if there's any headlines. Seeing some unusual options activity in Microsoft. Largely bullish flows. Some 420s, 430s coming through with over 500,000 in premium. That's largely what I see. I don't see a lot of headlines. It looks like it's more unusual options activity. I mean, you could say that the Lenfest Institute, OpenAI, and Microsoft announcing a $10 million AI collaboration may have gotten people a little excited about the company, but I think it's more the options flow and maybe whatever those folks are seeing that's driving price discovery higher in Microsoft. Again, about 38,440 shares on offer at 430. Pinduoduo now trading up 5.5%. This thing does not stop. It's about to take out that offer at 132. And folks, I hope you enjoyed today's stream. I enjoyed presenting it. I always love doing these streams and talking about markets, talking about how I approach them, hoping that I can help you along in your trading journey. If you want to check out Bookmap, by the way, you can get up to 40% off. Visit TraderAid.com/bookmap. Scroll down to the specials. That's TraderAid.com/bookmap. If you like the SPX options visualizer, you can learn more about that by visiting TraderAid.com/SPX. It adds into Bookmap, so you do need to have a copy of it to use it. And if you want to learn more about TraderAid, visit us at TraderAid.com. We've got a 3-day free trial on our Discord right now. So I'll catch you all next week, Tuesday, 9 a.m. Eastern. See you then.